Here's one from CNBC. Now everybody's talking about the U.S. North Korea summit, but as far as I'm concerned, this is probably the closest article I've seen to being on the money from an American source, no doubt, which is highly, highly unusual. But here it is. China could come away a big winner from the U.S. North Korea peace deal. China is closely watching what kind of peace deal, if any, is brokered at the Tuesday meeting between North Korean ruler Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. Beijing's security interests will be served if a potential agreement weakens the U.S. alliance with South Korea, reduces U.S. military presence in Asia, and limits the threat of refugees at the Chinese borders, according to the Atlantic Council. The milestone summit between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump has major implications for China, which has geopolitical and security interests at stake on the Korean Peninsula. Lurking in the background as a potential spoiler or helper in this drama is Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who sees both opportunity and peril. Fred Kemp, president and CEO of foreign policy think tank Atlantic Council, wrote in a recent note. The world's second largest economy has long said it supports a nuclear-free peninsula, but strategists say its greatest priority is preventing a North Korean regime collapse. If the rogue state falls under the weight of sanctions, that could send a flood of citizens to China. For Beijing, the right sort of peace deal could weaken the U.S. alliance with South Korea, reduce the threat of conflict and refugee flows on Chinese borders, and ultimately lead to the withdrawal of American troops from South Korea, said Kemp. Ending the U.S. military presence in South Korea, a major requirement for Kim's administration to relinquish nuclear weapons, is expected to boost China's goal of minimizing America's influence in Asia. What China wants. Beijing and Pyongyang ultimately possess the same goals for the Trump-Kim summit. Get the White House to relax sanctions on the isolated nation, according to Gregory Kulaki, a China expert in the Global Security Program of Research and Advocacy Group Union of Concerned Scientists. China and North Korea have cut their deal. China, see what I'm saying? I've said this. China and North Korea have cut their deal already, Kulaki said on a UCS podcast. That deal entails Xi's administration is resuming some economic relations with Kim's government if the latter freezes missile and nuclear weapons tests, he explained. But in order for China to open up the economic door a little bit, there is going to have to be some relaxation of those sanctions, which means there's going to have to be some concession from the United States. This is exactly. That's all this was about. Kulaki continued, adding that such a scenario would constitute a victory for both Pyongyang and Beijing. During a May meeting between Kim and Xi, the Chinese leader reemphasized support for North Korea to stick to denuclearization, while Kim was quoted as telling Xi that Pyongyang won't need to possess nuclear weapons if a relevant party drops its hostile policy and security threats, evidently referring to the U.S. Shortly following the encounter, Trump said Kim was possibly being influenced by Xi. Well, you already know that. Possibly. No, it's not even a statement. You could have made that statement. Nobody would have questioned that one. The U.S. president also urged China to maintain a secure border with the pariah state. Ideally, China's outcome for the Tuesday meeting is for a soft landing. That is, a denuclearized North Korea that gradually carries out reform and opens up its society, which will make economic dynamism in the sub-region possible, said Ren Zhao, professor of international studies at Shanghai's Fudan University. What China doesn't want. The Communist Party may be worried about the prospect of a reunified Korea. If the North and South were to unify, the new state could end up under the U.S. influence. If Trump navigates too well, China could be confronted with a stronger, larger, and ultimately reunified Korea as a regional democratic bulwark and U.S. ally. Kemp warned. A worst case peace deal for Beijing would if the U.S. and South Korea and North Korea were to form some kind of group or alliance, Zhao echoed. But that's quite unlikely, he added. I agree with him. That is very, very unlikely. Paul Hanel, these names are killing me, director of the Carnegie Tsinghua Center, told CNBC that China's fear of a result of strengthened relationship between the U.S. and North Korea would outweigh its desire to see denuclearization. When you ask them, would you want to see North Korea give up its nuclear weapons if that meant the result was a unified Korean peninsula aligned with the United States, then the answer by most Chinese is no. It shows you is the geopolitics this often trumps the denuclearization issue. In addition, Chinese officials fear that an unconventional president like Trump would really do something fairly dramatic, Hanel said. All right, at the end of the day, there's a couple of things going on. The U.S. really wants to maintain some kind of presence in Asia, and I think that the bases in Korea and Japan actually give them an excuse to actually do it. And China does want the Americans out of Asia. They really do. They want to control their area of their world, their little corner of the world. I would say little, but their corner of the world. And if North Korea is brought to heel and they denuclearize and the Koreas actually kind of make amends and they start on the road to reunification, which is something that I think both sides actually desperately want, because South Korea is tired of living underneath that nuclear threat. You know, Seoul's been living underneath the nuclear threat for, good God, 30, 40 years. I think they're kind of tired of it. And, even different places like even Pakistan and India, places like that, at some point the fighting has to stop. At some point you have to get down and start to do business. And for South Korea, maintaining not only their own army, but also maintaining the United States Army down there to actually protect it against North Korean invasion, which other than nukes, I don't think South Korea actually needs the United States there anymore. China doesn't want them there. North Korea wants to develop because they're tired of being hungry and poor, and they want to join the rest of the world other than just in military terms. And China itself doesn't want to be living underneath the threat of nuclear bombing. Because if the United States or something sets off in the Korean Peninsula, that fallout will actually fall on China. We're not including the refugees and the other kind of stuff that would actually cause more problems. So it's easier to bring North Korea and South Korea together underneath the Chinese umbrella than it is to actually keep them separate and this angst going. So as China starts to take more influence, you're going to see this more. You've already seen it, like I said, within Pakistan and India joining the Shanghai Cooperative, and Eritrea and Ethiopia being brought to the table and signing peace treaties, stuff like that. It all makes for good business, and Chinese are about good business. Trump going over there and actually after the fact, because just before they were talking about bombing North Korea. And so now he comes back saying that North Korea is basically not a nuclear threat anymore. So basically all these details have been worked out, but I think that this is a face-saving gesture by the Trump administration to actually get some brownie points and some kind of poll numbers and some kind of praise for doing pretty much very little. We'll see about the true pullouts. I think that's something that they're going to resist, is the true pullouts, because they do want to maintain some kind of presence on the peninsula. But eventually, if this reunification goes forward, and I do believe it is, the South Koreans will do what the Filipinos asked the United States to do, which is to leave. And eventually, Japan will do the same thing, because the Okinawans don't want the U.S. military there. They've been there long enough. We've been occupying Okinawa since the 1940s. We're talking about almost 80 years. It's time for us to kind of leave and relieve that expense. Because a lot of this expense, even under Eisenhower said this is supposed to be temporary. It's way past due. Even NATO and and there are places in Europe and on these bases all over the world. But it was never meant for this to go on this long. It was never meant for this to go on this long. But corporations, United States corporations actually feel better when the U.S. Army or the U.S. Armed Forces is actually protecting their interests, amongst other things. And it's time for that time to recede. Every dog has its day, and every king has its time on top of the mountain, and eventually going to have to recede to a newer king, which is probably Asia. And I've heard that refrain over and over again over the last couple of years, more and more and more, which is, at the time when I did this, 15, 16, maybe even 20 years ago, said this was coming, a lot of people just looked at me funny. And it's really not about vindication at this point. As far as me being a pragmatist, I really don't care. It's like, yeah, okay, it's happening. And it's probably happening faster than I actually thought it would. But it is here. It is ongoing. I'm sure there's going to be good points and bad points about China actually assuming its place in the Western civilization head, but all changeovers are uneven. You look at Israel, you look at the Middle East, you look at parts of Africa, you even look at what's going on in Latin America. It's going to be uneven, and anytime there's a changeover, there's going to be some kind of disruption. So, but that's all I have to say about Trump going over to meet Kim Jong-un, which is probably, I think, is mostly ceremonial. I could be wrong, but I think it's basically already baked into the cake. And to me, it's really no big deal, but some other people think it is. Anyway, I'm going to jump off of here. This is BGS out, and I will see you guys on the next one.